Getting up the courage to ask out that attractive someone for the first time? Those quiet moments before getting up to deliver a speech? Feeling like we're about to cry in public? What do all these situations have in common? The dreaded V word. Vulnerability. Vulnerability equals risk. We feel it most in the moments where we're about to do something that we know carries with it the risk of exposing our innermost thoughts and feelings. That, in turn, gives others the opportunity to rake our very souls over the coals of burning hellfire. Or at least that's the way it seems to us at the time. Those feelings of anxiety that we experience before doing something vulnerable usually stem from the uncertainty we feel as a result of taking that risk. After all, we don't really know what the outcome is going to be. While I can't speak for others, I can say that in my past, I have prevented myself from living the life that I probably should be living because I was too afraid to make myself vulnerable. Whether that was admitting I was wrong or going out in public in the My Little Pony pajamas my daughter so badly wanted me to wear. I was so afraid of others seeing me as somehow less than that I actually cut myself off from the opportunity of doing those activities in the first place. The great Harlem writer James Baldwin once wrote, "Love takes off masks that we fear we cannot live without and know we cannot live within." When we do something in a moment of vulnerability, we are accepting all possible outcomes, but facing our fear anyway out of the spirit of that love. Now, vulnerability also has a nasty younger sibling named accountability, which we will define here as not only the act of recognizing when we've done something wrong, but also the act of openly admitting that fault to others in the spirit of vulnerability. When I was younger, this was by far the scariest damn thing I knew existed. To me, being wrong may as well have been a social death sentence, because somehow I assumed that if somebody else knew I was wrong, that they would see all my faults open and on display. As I got older, though, I realized that people who freely admitted whenever they were wrong didn't come across as weak. In fact, these were some of the strongest people I knew. Something about their openness and readiness to admit fault made them come across as not only confident but caring. And they radically changed my view of vulnerability and accountability. One of those people would later become my mentor and a good friend, Dr. Shan Furch, a forgiveness researcher at Gonzaga University. One of my favorite stories he shares involves a time when his future father-in-law showed him how vulnerability, accountability, and forgiveness all worked together to restore the dignity of a person who had been harmed.
And the first time I heard about forgiveness asking came from him. He had made a sharp comment at the dinner table to his wife. I didn't even pick up the sharp comment because on a 100-point scale of verbal violence, that was a -8 in my family. And so I was like, wow, that was nice. And so, anyway, I'm over sitting on the couch a little bit later, and he comes over and sits next to me, and he says, "I'd like to ask your forgiveness for the way I treated my wife at the dinner table." And I didn't know what to do. I'm like, you don't have to ask me. And he says, "No, I don't ask just for you. I mean, in our family, we ask forgiveness of the person that we harmed and also everybody else that was there in order to restore the dignity of the one that was harmed."
His story ended up inspiring me to do one of the most daring and vulnerable things I've ever done. My oldest son had just graduated from Navy boot camp, and our flight back to Spokane from Chicago had been delayed. As a result, we only had minutes to make our connecting flight in Denver, but unfortunately we were seated at the back of the plane. So we asked the flight attendants if they would run interference for us to let us get off first before everybody else. Unfortunately, and somewhat predictably, as soon as the fasten seatbelt light went off, everybody got up out of their seat. Bastards. I knew we were in danger of missing our next flight, and it showed. My anger and my frustration were boiling over, and as soon as we got free from the plane, we bolted. Now, of course, our next flight was in the next concourse over, so we had to run quite a ways, and by the time we had gotten there, there was no plane at our gate. I was ready to throw a full-on tantrum at this point. I saw a ticket agent at the Delta counter, and I walked up quite angrily and asked him what I was supposed to do. Of course, he looked like he was in a hurry, and he started running away from the gate, turning around just long enough to say, "Sorry, I can't help you right now." My fit reached epic proportions, and all of the frustration that had built up exploded in a flurry of 4-letter words, most of which were unfortunately aimed at the ticket agent. He turned around just long enough to point out where the automated kiosk was, and I called him yet another colorful name just before looking down and noticing my son was looking up at me. At that moment, I realized just how incredibly wrong I had been. But more to the point, I realized that I was setting an example for my son on how he should act when he's angry. I had to think about it for a while, and it took me a few hours, but eventually I confided in my oldest daughter what I was about to do, and I asked her to stay with our luggage. I grabbed my youngest hand and I told him to come with me, and we walked over to the counter where the ticket agent was busy helping other people. We waited in line for a while until it was our turn, and when it was, I approached the counter extremely nervous. I said to this man, who I had just compared to human excrement only a few hours earlier, I don't know if you remember, but a few hours ago, I acted like a complete and utter. We missed our flight, I took it out on you, and for that, I have to apologize and ask your forgiveness. The ticket agent looked absolutely shocked and speechless. But after a brief awkward silence, he told me his side of the story, which was that he was rushing to another flight to try to help out a passenger with a medical condition, and that's why he wasn't able to stop and help me earlier.
Which definitely put my issues in perspective.
But then he reciprocated, and he proceeded to apologize to me and ask my forgiveness for not being able to help earlier. We forgave one another, and I made a new friend that day in a ticket agent named Ron. Later, I wrote about this story in an article for the Huffington Post because I felt like it deserved to be shared. That story ended up going viral all over the world, and after having been shared and read by millions, I realized just how much we crave redemption stories like this. But none of it would have taken place had I not mustered up the courage to face the risks that are inherent with vulnerability and taking accountability. Now, as we reach the halfway point in this 16-part series, it's your turn. Go back through the communication audit that you did way back in part 4 and select a single issue or situation that you would like to work on further. Look carefully at that issue or situation and try to identify your role in having created that problem. Start thinking about how pride and ego may play a part in this as well. Last of all, start developing a plan on how you might go about addressing this particular issue or situation. You don't need to have a full plan yet, because we're going to revisit this again when we get to parts 12 and 16. You know the routine. Like this video if you like where we're headed, subscribe if you'd like more content, and I'll see you next time.